Okay, so one last type of assimilation is called umlaut, and this is an interesting one. It's assimilation at a distance. And it's when a vowel or a glide in one syllable affects another vowel in a preceding syllable. So your V1 becomes more like V2. And this is sort of hard to explain without actually seeing an example, so let's look at an example. This example is going to be from English, and I want to show you three stages of earlier forms of English is what we're going to focus on. So we're going to look at the singular and plural forms of goose and mouse in pre-Old English 1, pre-Old English 2, excuse me, which is a little later, and then early Old English. And so you can see, and by the way, you need to note that we have some unfamiliar vowel symbols here maybe. So this, we have a mid-front rounded vowel, and we have a high front rounded vowel, u. And so, first of all, our modern English forms here are goose for the plural and geese. Goose for the singular and geese for the plural, mouse for the singular and mice for the plural. But actually, let's not worry about modern English for now. Let's just focus on the changes that occurred earlier. So you'll notice that the singular forms for goose and mouse stayed the same. Ghost, 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 moose, moose, moose. But what about the plural? So first of all, just looking at the very first stage, pre-Old English 1, how is the plural signaled in early Old English? I'm sorry, in pre-Old English 1. So it's just an E suffix, right? So you just had ghost and then you have ghosty, moose, moosey. Pretty simple. So how is the plural then signaled in early Old English, the blue form? Well, now you just have a vowel difference, ghost to goose, moose to moose. And what is that difference? Well, here we have a mid-back rounded vowel, and here we have a mid-front rounded vowel for the plural. For mouse, for the singular, we have a high back rounded vowel, and the plural is a high front rounded vowel. So we can say that the plural is actually signaled by lip rounding in both cases. Everything stays the same. It's just it changes from round. I'm sorry, it's not lip rounding. It's I'm so sorry. It's signaled by vowel frontness, right? So in both cases we have a rounded vowel. In this case, a mid back, and in this case, a high back, and then it moves front for the plural. So why might that be the case? Well, if you don't see the middle stage here, then it's not very clear. But if you look at the middle, you'll notice that this vowel that used to be the plural in pre-Old English disappeared. But what happened in pre-Old English was that actually the frontness of this vowel was affected by the frontness of the suffix. So you had gosi, but this O actually fronted because of the E. Here you had musi, but the U fronted because of the E. So you end up with these forms gusi and musi. And then you ended up having the suffix drop off, and so you just ended with gus and mus. So it's pretty interesting because you have this sound change that was triggered by this vowel, but it's now, the source of the sound change is now invisible. Okay, so these examples have all been about historical change, but I just wanted to point out that all of these the process of assimilation, we have plenty of real-time examples, right? As we've seen before, this is the process that occurs in everyday speech. We've talked about this in terms of child language, and did we talk about it in terms of something else? Maybe L2 acquisition? But we also do it all the time. For instance, in casual speech, if you say you say I have to study, you might say I have to study. What kind of assimilation is that? Well, it's a V to an F. That's voicing assimilation. It's becoming voiceless because of this T. You might pronounce the word Home Depot. If you say it fast, you might say Home Depot, and that's going to be place assimilation because the labial is becoming alveolar before an alveolar stop. Or I know what you want. I can't even say I know what you want in careful speech goes to I know what you want. in casual speech, and that is an example of palatalization. Okay, we're going to go through some other processes pretty quick. You should have read these in your textbook, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just to have some practice. So in early Old English, the word for gander, which is a male goose, was ganra, and then in later Old English, it turned to gandra. Always was simle, and then it turned to simle. What is this? So you're adding something, so this is an example of epenthesis. And this type of epenthesis in these English examples occurs because of an articulatory reason. If you're saying, you'll note that it's between a nasal and a liquid, and then a stop appears. So why does this happen? Well, while you are, so remember, when you go from a nasal to an oral sound, you have to raise your velum to make sure that the air doesn't go through your nose anymore. And when you do that, if you do that before you've actually are supposed to, you end up producing a stop while your tongue is still at, in this case, still at the alveolar place of articulation. You produce a stop because you've moved your velum up, stopped the air before you actually start the liquid. We also see something we are familiar with from L2 acquisition. Latin scola went to Spanish escuela. We have epenthesis, and this is because the syllable structure constraints of Spanish are different than Latin. Here we have an example, Old English waps to later Old English wasp, meaning wasp, or thrida to third. And these are examples of metathesis, A. What about this? In Middle English, night was pronounced knicht, and now it's pronounced night. Ni was pronounced kne, and now it's pronounced ni. And here's some examples from French as well, where there was coda deletion. So these are examples of deletion. That one's not too hard. But I do want to mention, in terms of consonant deletion, including these examples we just saw, part of the annoying thing about English spelling is that there's lots of silent letters, and usually these silent consonants are actually remnants of a sound change of consonant deletion, consonant weakening or deletion. So we just saw the example of night and knee losing their K. Sword used to be pronounced with this W actually. Soften, bow, and light. All of the orthography actually signals something that used to be there. So now I want to go on and talk about weakening. So you can have weakening in consonants or vowels. We're going to talk about vowels first. So weakening, I guess the generic way to think of what weakening means is a sound gets sort of further from its target and closer to the surrounding sounds. And in terms of vowels, what happens usually is that when you have a regular vowel, a full vowel, it will often weaken or reduce to schwa, especially in unstressed syllables. And then, as we've seen in the past, unstressed schwa and unstressed syllables often deletes. So for instance, in Old English you had stanas, which meant stones. In Middle English it was stone, it was stones, and this is the orthography, but it was actually a schwa, so it went from a to schwa. And now in modern English it's stones, so the vowel completely deleted. Same with name. You used to have nama, then it went to nama, and then name. So going from a to schwa, or going from any vowel to schwa, is weakening, and then it's followed by deletion. And again, this is most common in unstressed syllables. You can also have consonant weakening, and consonant weakening usually occurs between two vowels. So first I'm going to show you an example. This is a nice, these are all from Romance. So in Latin, the word ripe was maturus, and in Spanish it's maduro. Well, Old Spanish it was maduro. So this went from a voiceless stop to a voiced stop. So here we have in Old Spanish that voiced stop, and in modern Spanish it's still spelled the same, but it's pronounced as a fricative, maduro. And so here it went from a stop to a fricative. You see, and then here's an example from Old French, same word, malheur, and in modern French it's just mur. And so actually the consonant deleted altogether. And consonants also often weaken in intervocalic position. So remember, for a consonant, you have to create a constriction, especially for these stops. Your tongue has to be all the way up on the roof of your mouth. And also, your vocal folds aren't vibrating. But between two vowels, your vocal folds are going to be vibrating for either vowel. And also, you might want to not have your tongue all the way up there on the top of the roof of your mouth. So in this position, consonants will often weaken, either by going from voiceless, which is stronger, to voiced, which is weaker, or by going from stops to fricatives to nasals to liquids to glides to deleting altogether. So let's look at this example again. So we went from a Latin voiceless stop to an Old Spanish voiced stop, which then went to a modern Spanish fricative. And in Old French, we see a fricative going to nothing. So those are the only sound changes I'm going to talk about. There are some additional sound changes: deaffrication, consonant strengthening, degemination, and rhoticism. You need to be able to recognize all of the articulatory processes listed in Table 18. So if I give you two forms, like an older form and a newer form, you need to be able to choose the correct process that has occurred from a list of processes. I won't make you come up with them yourself. You don't need to know the difference between syncope and apocope, or the difference between sequential change or segmental change.